Hey, real quick before we get going today, I've heard comments a few times about it because we do roll this out in podcast form and on YouTube. The audio quality of the spaces is not going to be fantastic. I'm walking around my crickety old house. You will hear some noises in the background here. You might hear Joe DeRosa slamming some weights at the gym. It is more of just an open forum conversation. So I apologize for any audio files out there that cannot handle background noise. We do have a plenty of podcasts where we will discuss stuff. But
Yeah,
this
this
is
is
not
just
that
well,
platform.
and because it's only through the Twitter app, we can only use your phone to record. So yeah, I mean everyone's got sort of a different. Everyone's got a different phone, obviously. Everyone's got a different environment, and this gives us a much easier access to the sort of forum roundtable sort of a atmosphere that we're looking for with this show. But obviously, there's there's a little bit of a give and take there in terms of the audio quality. So, like Aaron said, we apologize for that, but
Correct.
hopefully, it's enjoyable enough that we can look past that part.
Yeah, it does feel like people are enjoying it. We got a lot of people here, so I appreciate the folks that do enjoy this format. I like it. It's nice to not have to set up my camera. It's inevitable. I said it on Wednesday. DHop is just going to dominate the conversation. So this is the DHop hour, I'm guessing, Chris. I couldn't imagine anyone's got anything else to talk about today.
It's been the DHop, 72 hours. It feels like, but
Absolutely.
that's all right. I mean, the smoke is real. You know, I think on Wednesday I was saying like maybe 20% that this actually happens. I'm more towards 50 now. Um, Maybe even a little bit higher, just because of all the things that we've been hearing about what's been going on with him being the Bills looking at his medicals, and um, it just feels like there's certainly they're fairly well down the road in terms of this transaction.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point here before we get to DRUM, that while the Bills are leading the pack in this, it's one of those things where it's still hard to do, right? It's going to take a lot of things to line up and get in place for the Bills to get this deal to go down. To me, what's exciting is the fact that the Bills are leading and you're hearing it from reliable sources tells me that Brandon Beane's all in on 2024, right? Like this would be a move. They're going all in right now because you know the window's wide open to win a Super Bowl. That's the pulse of the fan base. And he's seeing what a lot of people are seeing, right? So this offseason is looking better and better to me. Even if they don't land this deal, to me it shows if a deal becomes available, if a player becomes available, they are willing to risk it to go all in right now, and that makes me happy. I think it should make most Bills fans happy.
Risk it for the biscuit, man.
That's it, baby. All right, D-Rum. We got some other speakers in here as well, but we're going to start in order of requests. What's happening, my man? Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Yeah, so kind of a curveball question that does tie into DHop. So if we do sign DHop, who would you guys prefer to be the number 3? Would you want it to be Shakir or would you want it to be Davis? Obviously, Davis has, a larger sample size and of evidence of production, but Shakir seems like he may have more promise.
I think that at first it's got to be Davis. Unless because I mean, uh, he's more seasoned. He's got more. He's certainly got more reps, and he's going to be in a contract year. So if they're not moving him via trade, he's certainly going to be motivated to put his best foot out there. I like Shakir a lot. I think that in the long term he's going to be a contributor to the team, and that does if he's doing it from the fourth receiver role. I mean, don't forget about Deontay Hardy. So it's going to be interesting to see how the depth at that position develops. But I think if you're talking about like a base 3 wide receiver formation right now, I mean Diggs and DHop and Davis makes sense to me. You can move those guys. Any of those guys can play from the slot or from the outside. So it'd be interesting to see the three of them on the field and how they can move them around.
Yeah, I don't hate the idea of Gabe Davis as a big slot type of guy, or like you said, use matchups. These are now pieces in a matchup scenario where, as pro amp likes to always say, it's rock paper scissors, and it's nice to be able to throw those options and have those different options available to you. So I would start with giving Gabe the majority of it, but I would work Shakir in there. Shakir to me, dude, is a guy that you manufacture touches for. We've had this gadget player in the offense. I think he can be that because he's like McKenzie felt like you were showing your hand, even though he was able to give you, show you what defenses were in for coverages by using them in that jet sweep role. He helped kind of dictate some stuff, but you knew when he was on the field, like he was a pretty limited player. He wasn't going to actually go out and run routes, especially early on. Shakir's a more well-defined route runner. I think he's a better wide receiver overall, but he could do those things. He has the speed and he's shiftier. So we have a lot of those types of guys. I know Hardy's also sort of in that mold, but that's how I would get Shakir involved in this offense still. But I would make Gabe Davis the number 3 primary guy, if that answers it. So,
yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thank you. Who was next, Chris? Did you see it? Was it MJ?
I think MJ and Whittle kind of both came in at the same time. But yeah, go ahead, MJ, and then we'll get Whittle going.
Cool.
Hey, guys, good morning. So to totally distract from the DHop conversation, Greg was posting stuff yesterday that Poona Ford might be signed by the Bills. And I've been a Poona Ford stan since the Senior Bowl 5 years ago. And I just feel like that would really solidify the interior defensive line. So maybe a couple questions about that. Like, where would you guys potentially see him fitting in? And would we need to move on from anybody if they did that? Maybe that's like a sign that the Bills are willing to trade Ed Oliver. I know they just restructured Tim Settle, so I don't know if he would necessarily be like a cut candidate, but it seems like it might be a little crowded in the defensive interior.
Well, we definitely need a 4th guy. I mean, Jordan Phillips isn't signed. Does Poona Ford's more of a one tech a la Daquan Jones, right?
He's undersized for the one tech though, right? A little bit. Like he's in terms of height, he's a shorter, stouter one tech, right?
That's right. He looks like a barrel or a fire hydrant.
Greg will fall in love with any large lineman who, pulls up his jersey and shows his belly.
His belly, yeah, that is true. He's good, especially for this area of free agency. I think it would be a win depending on the contract. I think what Greg was alluding to wasn't so much that the Bills are in on him, but that Greg is interested in him for the Bills. I haven't seen anything that the Bills have shown interest, but you wouldn't hear that from the Bills side at least. They might be waiting for some pieces to fall. It doesn't seem like there's a rush on him, particularly right now in free agency. So I would welcome the addition. But to answer your question, I do think it would maybe also coincide with the cap space freeing up of an Ed Oliver, where maybe you have to free up that cap space to make this potential of a DeAndre Hopkins trade to bring that back in sort of full circle. So you move on from Ed Oliver and you bring in another interior defensive lineman. Even though he's not that Ed Oliver role, you maybe can double up that Daquan Jones role. I know that Eric maybe has some concerns about, how long can Daquan Jones play in that role as the penetrating one tech that they have. They don't just want a space eater. They want a guy that can get after the quarterback. Ford can do that from the one tech role. So I get the interest. I get the desire to bring him in, especially in this last wave of free agency. But I think right now, they got to see how this Hopkins thing plays out, and maybe they have to make some cap space moves in regards to that. Hope that answers that.
Yeah, thanks you guys.
Yeah, no problem. Whittle, what up, man?
What's going on, Aaron? You're my favorite.
I love it, man. I love is that a new profile picture? I love that.
Yes, that's new.
I like it.
Thank you, appreciate it. Hey, so I love where we're at in free agency. I love the moves on the offensive line, especially. Absolutely love Damian Harris. I still don't have confidence that with all these extra additions, Ken Dorsey is going to be able to get out of the way and allow these guys to go out there on Sundays and put 40 up, put 40 up on people. I don't know if he's going to be able to do that. It's not like we have foolproof players on this roster right now that, a gorilla could go in there and just draw squiggly lines and it will work out. We have guys that have specific skill sets. You have to scheme Trent Sherfield open. You have to scheme Hardy into a free release position to put pressure on secondaries. I don't know if he can do that. I mean, we didn't see it last year. Granted, we're making a lot of good moves, and it looks really good, and I'm going to dominate people on Madden next year. But as far as on the field production, what are we doing? Is there a reason to be confident in Ken Dorsey right now with the weapons that we're getting, and why?
So I think if you've listened to me in the show and here, I'm super critical of Ken Dorsey. So I don't want this to come off as homerism in any way, but I do think if a good way to look at Ken Dorsey right now is a little bit to reflect back on Brian Daboll in his time here and some of the struggles during the Brian Daboll era offensively. We saw some much worse performances, some higher variance performances from Brian Daboll's offenses in his time here with better, in my opinion, skill positions at the time. You had Cole Beasley in his almost prime, right there in his prime, being 1,000-yard wide receiver from the slot position. Obviously, Stephon Diggs being Stephon Diggs. Like, I think he had more weapons than than Dorsey had last year. I think the offensive line maybe regressed in some areas last year. Now, is that coaching? Is that players? Hard to say. I think probably a lot was players and Roger Saffold being a total whiff. Gabe Davis being hurt, I think, hurt things. I do think Ken Dorsey got a little bit better as the season went on. I know that there is the thing out there that Stephon Diggs said, they didn't like the way things went in the second half of the season, but in the Cover One Slack channel, in the film Slack that we do over there, in that Cincinnati game, Ken Dorsey schemed a lot of stuff that worked. He knew what Cincinnati was going to do. He had it schemed open, and execution wasn't there, and points were left on the field because of that. And seeing those things gives me some hope. But now I need to see him. We heard Josh Allen say, hey, you got to copycat the Kansas City Chiefs, essentially. That's what I want to see. Can you scheme open manufactured touches for Dawson Knox, for James Cook? Get Naheem Hines going. Like, get these guys in space, manufacture them touches when your offense starts to stall out. Can they do that? I don't know. But I have some hope that they're going to try to.
My next question is I'm sorry. My last question, I'll go back to listen after this is, with all of these moves, where do you see the draft? Like, where do you see us going in the draft? Because, before free agency and all these other things started, the fan base is like, go offense, go offense, go offense. Don't pick another defensive player. Where do you see us going now? Because I think we've added a lot. I think we filled a lot of holes, and not just with like Band-Aids. Like this isn't signing Mario Addison and Bobby Hart. Like I think that they added some really, really good talent and younger guys at some key positions on this team. But where do you see us going in the draft as the roster, kind of shapes out right now?
Normally, I'd say best player available, and I think there are a bunch of different positions that would still make sense. As the roster stands right now, man, like, there is a glaring hole at linebacker, like a glaring hole. I mean, we've talked about maybe Bernard is, that starting linebacker in nickel two linebacker sets, but is he a Mike, or Milano? We talked about maybe moving to that Mike role, and I mean, Brandon Beane said that wasn't going to happen. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but right now it just seems really unclear how they're going to address the second level of the defense. So how they draft in the first round certainly is going to matter as far as how the board falls. But right now it seems like, a day one, day two pick, like the first or second round probably, you got to spend a pick at linebacker based on the current roster at least.
I agree. Right now, it's the most ideal situation is trade back for Jack, right? Like moving back the asset to get the guy early in second round. But at the same time, I'm all about just if he's there at 27, go get him. Like if that's the guy, I think this roster is in good enough position. If DeAndre Hopkins is a Buffalo Bill, yes, just do it. Like you're all in on this year. I do think you can play a little riskier with your assets when you were so close. I'll do anything for
If
one
Darnell
title.
Wright's there though, are you taking Campbell or Simpson over Wright?
Yeah, because I do. There's a couple other tackle prospects I also like, and I just think it's the most glaring need. Unfortunately for us too, I think the Bills are just more interested in Spencer Brown than I am in that investment of him. So I hate that for us in terms of maybe the investment they're willing to make. But your point is, it's right now it was the biggest loss that your team suffered. To maintain even the floor of that position, I don't believe is on your roster right now. I don't believe in Dodson. I think he's a fine backup. I don't know about Bernard. They made a pretty substantial investment in him, so you could see that they believe in him somewhat. Um, but I would go ahead and make the investment now. I think this is a team that's in a position to get a little loose. Not saying go out and be the LA Rams, but go all in. Go all in on the season. Go all in on the Super Bowl window. It won't be the only Super Bowl window that's open, but I just want one real shot at a championship. We had, I think Anthony came in next here. Anthony Cole out there. What's going on, Ant?
Hey guys, how we doing?
Good, man. Good morning.
Morning. I mean, everybody's talking about DHop, but what do you guys, first of all, think the value is there, like trade asset wise, and or what do you think you would be willing to give up? I think there's a couple different scenarios that could work. I think you could give up a little bit more to have Arizona eat a little bit of the money, like whether it's a third plus Davis or Oliver and a sixth plus Davis or something like that, and trade some late round picks or something like that. I think there's a lot of value there. People are talking about the $19 million cap hit, but I think if you thought that DHop was a long term solution, I don't know that he's a long term, but I think he could be an intermediate stopgap. You can extend and get that cap hit down pretty far. Plus, if you're able to work the trade so that they eat a little bit, I just didn't know what you guys thought. What some of the value there might be.
Tilt, what do you think on that? By the way, good morning.
Hello, gentlemen. Look,
What's up, Dave?
given how tight the Bills are up against the cap right now, and given sort of the dead cap that they've the buttons they've already pressed, right, to give cap relief so far this offseason by pushing other cap hits out into future years, I actually would be more willing to give up a little bit more on the draft capital side to get Arizona to take more of that. So there are two trains of thoughts, right? You give up less draft capital to potentially have to, if you're the Bills, take on more of that and kind of try to work it into your cap situation, or give up maybe a little bit more draft capital plus maybe a player to have Arizona eat more of those dollars. I'm personally on the side of giving up more draft capital to have Arizona eat more of those dollars so that the Bills actually can be still a little bit more flexible with their cap situation. And at the end of the day, DeAndre Hopkins, 31 years old. He came back last year for the Cardinals, and with the likes of McSorley and Colt McCoy, in certain spots, I mean, he put up very impressive. He played very impressively when he came back from that suspension. So I think he still got something to prove. I do think he obviously would be a clear featured wide receiver 2. The question is how many years beyond 2023 do you expect to get out of him? And I think that's probably the piece of the equation that might be sort of the piece that could be holding up a potential deal, right? Is like how the Bills see DeAndre Hopkins in their future beyond 2023 may be the reason they're hesitant to give up higher draft capital or to give up players in that regard. And so if I'm the Bills, that's kind of what my train of thought is right now. I obviously the report came out yesterday that the Bills weren't really linked to Jerry Jeudy in any regard, but that would have been my preference given his age, et cetera, the 5th-year option, but doesn't sound like they're involved in that. So clearly they're sniffing around still to try to look at an upgrade at that wide receiver position. But yeah, I guess the short of it is I'd be more willing to give up capital and have Arizona eat dollars to kind of tie into what Aaron was saying about, being a little more loose, if you will, and kind of maybe going for it in 2023. So that's kind of where I land. That's kind of where I land on it.
I guess if they're bringing him in for medicals, that probably means that they've figured out the compensation of the deal. Like both sides are at a point where they're comfortable.
If the medical rumors are accurate, that which I believe at this point, in sounds of how much interest there is, I would think that all of that's been sorted out at least.
But
in
it'll be
principle.
interesting to see what they like. To Dave's point, like there's a ton of cap. We heard Pac-Man Jones on McAfee saying that DHop would play on a 1-year deal. There was something else that came out yesterday that was along those lines. So I'm curious. I'm curious to see how that would look, because it would sound like he'd be taking quite a haircut off of his current contract.
It would be a mercenary thing. You just hire him for a Super Bowl run, which we've seen guys do. That is probably best case scenario. But to Tilt talked about, like how much does he have left? And my thinking on that too is Emmanuel Sanders was here at age 34 and still put up close to 700 yards in a split role in that number 2 receiver role. I think that Hopkins could do that or more, which I was happy with Emmanuel Sanders type production. And I'm not saying, I think he still has enough to be a legitimate top. This would be a top combo in the NFL, right up there with the Bengals, I think, this season. But say Father Time and that age wall does hit him at some point, maybe in the next season or maybe the season after that. I think even if you could get around 600-700 yards, not that yards matter necessarily, but just for the sake of the conversation, an Emmanuel Sanders type level vet going forward, if you had to be on the hook for multiple years, I'd still risk that to stay in the Super Bowl window with Josh Allen.
Yeah, and I mean DHop's a red zone threat too, right? With his size and those hands. So I mean, even if he's not the vertical, downfield guy, especially like later on, he could still provide value, I think.
Yeah, I've got a little bit killed here. Before we get to the next question, I want to address a couple of people made comments in the YouTube section, Chris. I don't know if you saw it. I tried to defend myself a little bit, but I had mentioned on the last time we were talking about DHop that it's not stylistically what I actually prefer and want for Josh Allen and receivers, but I do think they address some of that and some guys that can separate with Hardy and stuff like that. So it's a move I'm willing to make because I think they have guys that can separate for him. But in an ideal world, I would prefer Jerry Jeudy if Jerry Jeudy was available for a reasonable amount and Denver was in more of the area that Hopkins seems to be in. If all things were equal, I would prefer a guy like Jerry Jeudy. I love Hopkins. I'm going to be crazy excited about it. But in terms of what I think works best for Josh is a guy that can separate. But now I do think no matter where DeAndre Hopkins goes, he's going to come and have a huge impact, have production, be a force on offense. I think all those things can exist. I think people just thought I said, that isn't the ideal fit for Josh Allen, taking it as if I don't think this is going to work at all. And that's not the case at all. I'm very excited to add a player like that to any offense. But I think Big Baller Bean was next. Been waiting real patient out here in the spacing. So it's all yours. Space out, my friend.
Hey guys, good morning. Thanks for having me on. I understand the whole mentality of what the Rams did of going all in, getting that Super Bowl. Congrats to them. They have a trophy to show for it. Now they're kind of falling apart, and I understand it. I understand Bills fans have been waiting forever to just be there again, and I get it. I still struggle to have that mindset, so I always look at the future. So when it comes to DHop, my question is, if this happens, if they trade for him and say he sticks with the 2-year contract or even longer, what do you guys see for the future with Davis being on his last year and possibly if he has a good season, whatever, prices himself out. Maybe he doesn't price himself out and the cap jump is good enough to keep him for a couple more years, whatever. But do you see a receiver come? Do you see them putting any significant draft capital into a receiver this year? I kind of don't, because if you do, you have 7 guys. And so are they going to roster 7 or are they going to cut one of these newer guys? I don't see them cutting Shakir. I don't see them cutting really anyone else. So you have either Hardy or Sherfield that you're going to cut, or you're going to roster 7 receivers with a somewhat significant draft choice. So I just want to get your guys' thought on the future of receiver as it comes to if the DHop trade happens.
Well, one thing that you have with the Sherfield signing is now you can roster 7 receivers and 3 running backs. He kind of takes up the roles of Taiwan Jones and Jake Kumaro with one roster spot. So it's kind of a savvy move by Beane to bring this guy in who can play depth. He can come on the field as a receiver, but he's going to primarily be a special teamer in all likelihood. And now you don't have to bring back Jones or Kumaro necessarily. So I think they should. I mean, I think they need to keep bringing in guys. I mean, DHop is great, and he, I would think would be great for a couple years still. But they want to keep bringing in young talent, especially if they have a shot at someone who's a great value where they pick. Yeah, I can definitely see them bringing in another rookie receiver.
Yeah, I mean, look, the fact of the matter is, right, is beyond Stephon Diggs and really Deontay Hardy, Khalil Shakir is the only other receiver you really truly have on this roster at the moment beyond 2023, right? It's Diggs, it's Hardy, and it's Shakir. So I don't know that bringing in DHop, even if it's for 1 or 2 years, necessarily stops you from making a pretty big investment at the wide receiver position in the draft. Now, does that mean round 1? I don't know. Is it round 2? Maybe. But if a guy like Jackson Smith-Njigba is there, or if there's another guy that the Bills really feel strongly about can be part of this future, and they potentially see themselves not having Gabe Davis in the mix in 2024, I don't think it stops them, right? Because again, Deontay Hardy is here to fill a role. He's here for 23 and 24. The future of this position on the Bills depth chart is still pretty murky, right? And this is kind of the same point I was making last year when we signed Roger Saffold at the guard position, right? Like, great, you tried to kind of band-aid that for a year, but there were going to be the same question marks going into 2023 as we had in 2022 with the offensive line. And so now the Bills have kind of done a decent job somewhat addressing that now with the signing of McGovern a little bit, but like the receiver position to me is still pretty murky beyond this year. So I don't think it would stop them from putting draft capital into that position.
If there was a position in football I felt better about being a little murky going into an offseason, it's wide receiver for me. There's a few guys I like in the draft. Smith and Jokbo would be one of those guys. There's a few. The asset allocation for me is again, I'd rather take that risk on the linebacker in terms of position.
Oh, I agree. I agree with that.
Yeah, and knowing that I can flip this room in a year, right? Like there's going to be an opportunity here every single year in the draft to find that guy, or maybe it's a late round pick and not as much of an asset allocation here, just to get a little bit younger there. But I think you can flip this room pretty quickly. To me, circle back to Gabe Davis, the best case scenario, in my opinion, is he balls out in that wide receiver 3 because of the gravity that Stephon Diggs and Hopkins pull, and hoping that Ken Dorsey can utilize the other guys like Davis and Knox because of what those guys are pulling. He balls out, gets a decent contract in the offseason, and now you're back in comp pick land where the Bills currently stand, getting free picks, and that's how you continue to fill in. You get guys, they pan out, you invest in them, they give you back some picks. I think the Bills will start to enter that. I know a lot of people have been highly seeking after comp picks year over year. The Bills are a little bit behind on that. Now their contracts of the guys they drafted are starting to come up. If they don't trade Ed Oliver, they're going to lose out on him in the offseason too. Like you're going to have opportunities where guys are going to get pretty good sized contracts elsewhere. Now is the time where you're starting to reap. It's like Josh Allen's pistachio farm, right? He's not going to get any pistachios for 10 years. Sometimes you plant these seeds in these investments and they don't come out the way you want them to until 4 or 5 years down the road. So I think we're now entering comp pick land where people were wanting it over the last couple of years.
When are we going to start seeing the Josh Allen pistachio commercials? I mean, there's so many damn pistachio commercials. How's there not been a Josh Allen one yet?
He should be the face of the whole pistachio industry in America for sure, right?
If they were smart.
Adam D, before we get anywhere else, what's happening, my man?
Hey guys, how's it going?
What's up, Adam?
All right, so this kind of touches on a couple things that you guys have been talking about. So seeing as how the entire justification to go after DHop is that we are not satisfied with Gabe, and if we acquire DHop, we're kind of running out of room for receivers, and we might lose Gabe later because he might earn a really big contract. Maybe it makes sense to just have Gabe be the comp for DHop. You can work out, picks going each way, salary retained each way. I don't know, it kind of makes sense to me. And you could follow it up with, a big high draft pick and then not feel bad that, you don't have room to play all these guys.
It makes sense for him to be part of the deal. And, I mean, if he's not, it also makes sense to me to look at possibly moving him, later on, during camp, preseason. And maybe instead of a lineman this year, he's a guy that they move for a late round pick, as we're getting towards the end of the preseason.
Yeah, I think he becomes a flexible asset for you. That it's like having liquid capital, right? Like some players on your team, you're not moving. And right now, currently, without a DeAndre Hopkins, he is not a liquid asset, in my opinion. But if you do gain an asset that replaces him, then I do think he becomes a little more liquid. I don't think the interest in DeAndre Hopkins equals a lack of confidence or faith in Gabe Davis. I think that Brandon Beane has talked about a number of times. If he has opportunities to become better at positions and it becomes available to him, that it would be a discredit to his job to not do that. And this isn't an insult to Gabe Davis to say that DeAndre Hopkins is better than him, right? This is just the business of football. But I don't think it's an indictment of how the team feels about Gabe Davis. I think the team is way higher on Gabe Davis than the media or Twitter or anyone else is. I think they really like him as a player. Would actually probably like to keep him part of this team going forward. But this is just the business of football where DeAndre Hopkins doesn't become available to you every single season. This is something that you got to strike on when you have opportunities.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I've been a pretty big Gabe fan and supporter. Like you said, just the opportunity, and I just think based on the other factors, it kind of makes sense for him to be either comp in this deal or moved out for some other deal. But we'll see what happens. Yeah,
it's a good point for sure.
Yeah.
I did want to say real quick, because I know we've been talking about Poona Ford and people have been tweeting about him in the space here. Greg did put out a tweet around this with pointing out that the deadline for the comp pick calculation is May 2nd. So I think he was joking around. It was like, Alexa, remind me on May 3rd to sign Poona Ford. So
sure. And they may even have said that to his agents of hey, look, We want him. We got a deal in place that you will like. We've agreed to it, and we will give him a little bit more if we can wait. Like, unless you want to take that under, what is it, the 1.75, so that we can sneak in under
I think
here.
that's what they feel like is safely under. Like I've heard 2.5 being that
Right.
threshold, but yeah,
I
I
mean,
feel
it's
like
not a coincidence.
yeah.
All those contracts lined up underneath, right? So
We were joking about Brandon Beane, like, standing out on the corner, spinning a sign that
yeah,
says, $1.7 million roster spot.
yeah. I give the comp people a hard time, just because it's been like years where there was really not a chance, but they still wanted it so bad. This is the year that makes the most sense. You've lost out on Jermaine, and that you have the opportunity for that third. Like, this is the gem. If you're a comp pick, this is the ultimate comp pick to get. So
Yeah,
this
they
is the year
haven't
to
had
do
a
it.
shot at a third round comp pick. They just haven't. So
Yeah, and this is the time to do it, and this is time to be frugal for that. And it hasn't seemingly also interrupted the plan for the offseason to this point.
I saw Joe come in. We should bring Joe in. What's going on, man?
What's up, guys? How we doing? Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. I like the new profile picture, rocking the guns, man. You got the guns out on the profile picture. Be careful. They come for you.
Sorry, guys. I know there's no firearms allowed.
Did you get a sponsorship or something? What do you hold up
No,
there?
so I was at a paintball festival in Pennsylvania last summer called Invasion of Normandy, and at night we were playing a game called Beer Darts. I don't know if you guys have played, but essentially, you throw a dart at a beer can, and if it punctures the beer can and it spills, you have to drink up until where it stops spilling. So I punctured the top of the can through the ring, and I held it up in a picture, and that's this profile. No sponsors here, but anyways, Aaron, I wanted to say I agree with your point completely. I was going to make this point too. Getting DeAndre Hopkins doesn't mean you're out on Gabe Davis. It doesn't cast any dispersions to him at all. I actually just think it's going to, just having him alone on your team, change the entire game for your team, for your offense during the season. Teams are going to have to change how they scheme against you. Teams are going to have to respect the fact that now you have another vertical threat. Well, not a vertical threat, but someone who can go down the field and make these contested catches and is a great route runner and gets himself open and has these big hands and an insane catch radius that just absolutely bolsters an already good offense. I think, if anything, this is going to help Gabe because it's going to take some pressure off of him. And even though we had our concerns about when they brought in Emmanuel Sanders and he was taking snaps away from Gabe, I don't think this is going to be a similar situation, even though I do think DeAndre Hopkins is very clearly the better of the two receivers. I think what you can actually do now is have DHop take one side, Gabe take the other, both of them go up. Now you bring Diggs in as a super slot role where he can be moved around anywhere you want him to go, which is something they were already kind of doing this past season when they needed a spark because they weren't getting much out of the slot. Only this time, Diggs has that role established. Now you don't feel as much pressure to draft someone who needs to be your established slot guy. You have Shearfield and Hardy as your backup guys, where Hardy's more of a gadget guy, and you have Shearfield as the blocker who can also come into a slot if you need to take Diggs off the field or for whatever reason. I think having DHop just provides you an insane amount of versatility. I think the value you're getting for him, trading a low-round pick, maybe Arizona takes on some of his contract. Maybe he takes a one-year deal where it's a super cheap deal to prove himself because he hasn't been on the field as much as he would like, which would benefit both the Bills and DHop, is just something that I don't think you could pass up on. So I think it gives you the outlet to still see something from Gabe Davis. You're obviously, if you have a DHop in your offense, likely not going to see 1,000 yards from Gabe. But I do think it, one, makes it a little more affordable for next season, too, because if you have him as this wide receiver 3, where he's still productive, and I still think he could be, but he's also not going to put up insane T. Higgins or Jalen Waddle level numbers, that might make him more affordable when contract year comes up. So DHop not only provides you an affordable veteran all-pro receiver, it also makes your potentially great receiver cheaper for the future. So that's what I wanted to contribute. Go Bills.
Super slot mode. I'm imagining like an arcade game where you hit the super slot button and Diggs starts like glowing blue or something and just starts stacking touchdowns. But yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I think that Gabe's value for his next contract, it's already on the way down, given with this free agency period and just what the money that's been out there for receivers. I mean, the drop from like the Christian Kirk deal last offseason to like say Jacoby Myers this offseason. I mean, I get they're different players, different systems, but I think Kirk got like 17 and a half or $18 million AAV and Myers is at 11. And I mean, those were like, that's Myers' deal is the biggest one of this offseason so far for a receiver. It's just, it doesn't seem like the money is there. And so if we were talking about Gabe getting 15 to 20, during the year, now it just seems to me like it's going to be at the lower end of that, given where the market's at. But you're right, it could maybe depress a little further.
Still comp pick if he leaves, right? Like,
yeah, I wonder what level comp pick that would be. I mean, it depends on the value of the contract, but
well, if it's you don't move on from Ed Oliver and you're like, I don't know what his value is going to be, but you lose both of those players. I think you're back in comp pick bingo for another year beyond that. And it might not be the third, but you might get a few that you can convert into something else.
Oh man,
smaller
you're going to get people too excited talking about comp picks for
all
next year.
Comp picks, yeah. Greg's going to just pop in. Greg and Kevin Masseri
comp picks.
Pop in. You're like, what? Did I hear
comp picks? Someone said
it's
comp
like
picks?
the bulls from Finding Nemo.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or like that in Family Guy where someone touches the thermostat. Peter just runs in. Who touched the thermostat?
Yeah. I definitely think the idea of keeping Ed and getting the comp pick next year for him is interesting, but I personally am against it just because of the money you have to give to Ed this year.
Right now, yeah,
it's too much. I think getting him off the books and maybe trading him. And maybe even trading like him in a deal where you put your third round pick next year for him. I forgot who pitched this idea. That makes sense to me because you're probably getting that third pick back at this point. Third round pick.
Right.
Randy Hardman thinks the floor on Gabe's extension would be in the 12 to 15 AAV range, which again is lower than we've been talking about.
I could see it.
All right, Aaron, now's the time when you say, I got to get going in about 15 minutes honestly, here, guys. So
yeah, sorry. This is away. Pretty much, I do. I could go a little bit longer today, probably up to 10:40-ish. But then I do got to get going. I see Sabres. You doing it again here? Is that where you're cover one?
Oh, yeah, I threw that up in the Jumbotron. We're going to do a Sabres watch party tonight for 7 o'clock, and I jokingly changed the edit so it's the Cover One Hockey support group instead of the Cover One Hockey watch party because it's just been.
My wife went with coworkers to the game the other day, and she doesn't care about hockey, and she was just like a coworker thing, right? And it's bad. Like I feel so bad. We have one friend that's been season ticket holders the whole time we've lived here and known him. And he goes to every game. And do they even have a playoff odds at this rate? I know it was like in the.
There's still an outside chance, but it would take
an act of God,
a hell of a run. I mean, the Penguins have been slipping. But at the same time, the Islanders and the Panthers have been kind of surging. So it's it's not they're not mathematically eliminated or anything like that. But the way that they've been playing, at least it's hard to imagine that they go on that run. Although they have been up and down all year.
More excitement than previous failing seasons due to the age, right? And the fact that they were scoring offensively. It seems like they just need goaltending to get them over the hump.
Yeah, and a little more defense, a little more. But I mean, for us, it's like, yeah, it's still kind of fun to watch the games, but it's also just a great excuse to hang out. And like we did last time, the Sabres went down like 4-0 to the Flyers, and we basically turned it into a Bills podcast. We were talking Bills, and then we did a deep dive on the Mighty Ducks for like the entire third period.
Granted, we're also talking about a movie that had like the flying V, which can't happen because of like offsides. Because I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of clips where like the person at the point of the flying V isn't the puck carrier. Also, just from that perspective, like just blow up the flying V. Just like hit the guy in front. Like just stonewall it. Like just don't let them skate free into your zone. Like, it's not hard to defend.
I was actually watching for offsides. There's at least one. I think maybe the first time they do it, they're really careful to like have the person in back pass it up to carry it into the zone and then pass it back, which is like, I don't know.
There's no way it works that fluid because
Yeah.
it's not, the ice isn't that big for everyone. Like, you can't do that. Like, so the way they skate it up, they're dead center in the ice. So that means everybody on the opposing team is either in their defensive zone or just skating by the boards and just letting them run through the middle. Like,
well, it's the flying V. They're terrified. They have to just get out of the way.
It's just ridiculous. But that also means that the opposing coach is like, fuck, what do we do? Like, no coach would just be like, yeah, just let them skate it up. Like, we can't do anything. It's the flying V. Oh my God. Like, just like ducks. What are we going to do?
It was a lot of fun.
Who knows? Maybe the DHop news will break during the Sabres game.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And we got the ability to switch around too on playback, which is fun. Right. So like we could, we might check in on some March Madness. We'll see what happens.
Sure. My Huskies had a big win last night, looking good down there. So, also a little quick promo. I will be on with my partner, Greg Thompson, on his show. I will be a guest tonight on the Greg Thompson Sports Show because he missed our show this week. So I guilted him into making him put me on his show. And he already had all the high-end talent on early when he got started. So now it's my turn. But we'll be hopefully talking more Bills news, stuff like that. So make sure you tune in that as well, or check it out over the weekend. And Joe, you got a show here this weekend as well.
I do indeed have a show this weekend. For all of you listening to this Spaces, come hang out tomorrow at 11 a.m. Under Review is going live. I have some wonderful guests, including Joe Miller. I have David Fox, and Chris Kepner is coming on the show, ladies and gentlemen. He is joining in. We're going to be talking about free agency so far. Just basically looking back at what they've done, talking about some of the players, talking about what lies next, as well as some moves we'd like to see them make if DHop is not traded in that time frame. So we'll be on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. Come hang out 11 a.m. tomorrow. Going to be a good one.
I've been talking way too much on Cover One this week. This is like my third space and going on Joe's show tomorrow. Like, I will try to say new and interesting things and not repeat myself too much.
You can say anything you want. I'm happy to have you aboard. I really appreciate you coming on. Anyone who joins, I'm super appreciative of coming on. It's a fun time. I'm really looking forward to it.
It is a great show. This is your fourth episode, I think?
Yes,
right?
Fourth episode. I wasn't able to do last weekend because I was away. So this is number 4. Hopefully, I mean, we got plenty to talk about because this week was much more eventful. I'm kind of glad the 2-week span passed because it gave me a little more ammo. But yeah, if we get some breaking news today, tomorrow's going to be a blast. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's under review over on Cover One YouTube. You can catch up on the 3 episodes that are out if you want to. But yeah, it's a good show.
And now, I want to we are coming up against about a 20-minute window before I got to go grab my little guy from pre-K here. But let's kind of spitball. We know that the Bills are the front runners on this. We sort of already talked about how even being the front runners doesn't guarantee them getting this deal done. There's a lot of moving parts in trades. Who knows what could happen to trigger interest from another team? Somebody could come out of nowhere with a better deal. You just never know. But them being the front runners, I know everybody's impatient. We want it now. It's been 72 hours of DHop watch. But how long do you think this could go into? We heard speculation rumors that the medical process is beginning, but I mean, that could be something that takes time to get him there, go through the process. We saw with David Edwards, he visited, went back home, and then got a contract, right? It wasn't something that was instant right after the medicals. How long could this take to work out? Aaron Rodgers was supposed to be traded 3 weeks ago, and that's still sort of in the works. Where do you think this plays out, and how long do you think it could run to? And anyone's welcome into that.
Well, the Packers are going to hold a gun to the Jets' head until July 1st or however long it may take. They have all the leverage, even though neither team really should. They definitely can take as long as they want. But yeah, this is tricky because I think this is kind of gotten a lot of smoke in a very short amount of time. Given the acceleration of all the news we've heard about the DHop trade, it seems like it kindled from nothing, and now all of a sudden we're talking about if and when. I don't want to be cast any superstitions on this or jinx it or anything like that. So I'm never going to speak in absolutes. But if said trade were to happen, I would anticipate or imagine that it would happen sooner than later, and maybe by the end of today, just because I feel like, again, in 48 hours, we went from nothing on this to, oh, the Bills might have interest. Oh, okay, Buffalo Soldier, that's cool. He posted in a story. Oh my God, actual NFL sources are talking about the Bills are the front runner in the trade. And now there's medical speculation. Like, this has all happened so quickly that I feel like just given the trend, it's going to happen even faster. We might see it happen today. But again, if it doesn't happen and it takes till next week or something, like, I'll wait. We'll see.
Okay, so if it does not happen today, at Joe DeRosa, at Show DeRosa, and yell at
Please
him.
do.
Get your
Just come
pitchforks
on the
out.
show tomorrow. And
I
yell
want
at
you
him.
all at
That's right.
talking shit. Do it. Bring it.
That's right. No, I agree that it does seem to be accelerated, and I want people. Obviously there's legitimate sources talking about it. I think Aaron Wilson's one of the better sources for just being a local dude, primarily beat guy. He's a great source, all things NFL related, but he does have legitimate sources tied through the Houston Texans organization specifically. So I think he probably has some more insight into DeAndre Hopkins than most. And I may have been taking this at too much reading into it, but for me, watching Pac-Man Jones talk about it, I'm pretty convinced, 90-something% convinced that Pac-Man Jones' source is literally DeAndre Hopkins. Like, they're boys, they hang out. I think they just threw a text in Instagram or just texted him. It was like, hey, what's up? And he was like, hey, it's 5 teams. Buffalo's in the lead. Like, that's how I read the vibe from Pac-Man Jones. I could be totally off on that. I think his source is direct. So that, to me, accelerated the process. You see rumors. I'm a simp for any cool Buffalo Bills rumors on big players, but it's got to be pretty legit for me to get this type of excited where I'm on an official Mario Williams watch type Twitter refreshing.
Yeah, you
So
were talking about going on Spaces like immediately after the deal. I mean, like yesterday we were like you had the button ready to press that you were going to go live and say, "Hey, look, we got DHop," and that we might still do an emergency space if this happens, given at the right time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I hate to sound like I'm patting my own back or anything, but we've been doing this long enough. To me, where I think when it's just nothing, I know my sense is no, but there's too much going on here. There's too much indicating that there's serious interest, that it is already deep enough where maybe compensation has been figured out. And it's just the fine print stuff, and that there is a lot of moving parts in trades, and they can be complicated to get all the language and everybody happy and all the palms fed and all the stuff like that, or all the mouths fed. So we'll see. We got Wes's Moore. I'm going to add him as a speaker here to come on in. But I do expect things to heat up as we approach the weekend for sure.
Wes's Moore.
I just learned about losing Edmonds. How much did the Bills save that makes this DeAndre Hopkins trade possible by not re-signing Edmonds?
Well, Edmonds wasn't on the books at all for this year. So nothing, I guess.
It opened up long-term ability to do things because you aren't going to be on the hook for those assets later. But if they had re-signed Edmonds, even I don't think it would have been really hard on the cap this year. I think Greg Thompson showed good projections for what you could do with a long-term contract with a young player where you could get that cap hit initially down. So I don't think there is a correlation between, like Chris said, Edmonds was a free agent, so there was no money freed up. It was just now you don't have to make those investments into the future years, which you would have been tied up in. All right, so we're coming up on a final warning here. Anything else, Chris? Is there any non-DHop related stuff that we should have hit on here today, or am I just solely singularly focused?
Like the rest of the fan base, just on just on DHop watch. I think some picture came out yesterday with him drinking a coffee, and you could Kyle Slaggy saying he was like researching, disposable coffee cups and which restaurants use which ones. He's like, okay, I'm logging off for the day because this is ridiculous.
Oh boy, yeah, it might break the Mafia. You know what? Not talking football related or team related, talking petty related here for a second. The fan in me. One of my favorite things is going to be, and I've already seen some of it in some of the bigger posts, like Aaron Wilson's post, is teams that we are in competition with directly, their fan bases freaking out about like, how can they even do this? How can they afford that? This is ridiculous, and just crying because that always is to me an indicator that the Bills are doing something right. Like if other fan bases that we're competing with are freaking out about like, hey, how can they get away with this? That's the kind of move I want to make, and I can't wait if it does happen to celebrate it and watch them cry a little bit in the mentions. That's going to be sweet to me as a petty person.
I'll say this. One point that I think has been made before, and it was Brett Coleman who said it yesterday, but probably multiple times in the past. If you get DHop, the one thing you did was you took him from the Chiefs. That is a victory in itself because I do not want DeAndre Hopkins. I know we've spoken about it. Like I know we've talked about you can't concern yourself too much over what other teams are doing. You have to focus on you. At the same time, you are in a bidding war with the direct competitor in the AFC. Taking him away from them to put him on your roster would be exquisite. I love every bit of it. Just because you're not going to let him get a chance to ruin your life with Patrick Mahomes potentially in the playoffs. He'd be on your roster in a stacked team, and you would once again be the team that everyone has to worry about every single game for the rest of the season. So I would much rather see that happen. We'll see.
Yeah, you were not wrong, sir. I think the Chiefs have openly talked about that in the past. It wasn't a player that worked out. I think it was for Le'Veon Bell, where there was interest from the Bills. There was interest from other competitive teams, and they just went ahead and got him, not even necessarily with a plan, but just to prevent other team from getting him, right? Because they knew that their competitors wanted him, and they wanted to take away that competitive advantage. This would be a big that is just part of it. I think it's baked into it. I don't think it's why you do it. I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but that is a baked in additional good thing is you're getting a really good player who was going to go to a team that you would have had to deal with in the postseason. So that's an addition by subtraction for the Bills taken away from KC.
There's one sort of interesting thing that we might want to touch on, and that's the interest that the Bills are showing in running back draft prospects.
Mm-hmm.
We know Cook is around for a bit. He's on a rookie deal. They just restructured Hines to keep him around. They just brought in Damian Harris. A lot of this obviously depends on where a running back is drafted. If you're talking about like someone like Bijan, obviously he's going to be rostered. Let's say it's a rosterable running back that gets drafted. Are you looking at like Damian Harris being a cut candidate potentially?
Oh, I want to get Tilt's opinion on this mostly, but I will say I don't believe. Like I really like Damian Harris. I see why they brought him here, but I don't believe that contract is anything you can't walk away from. Again, similar to the thing we were talking about with Gabe Davis, it's not an indictment on how you feel about him. You get a Damian Harris right now so that you fill that need, so that if the draft doesn't work out your way, you're fine. You're okay. You have a floor. But if you are in love with a prospect and he's sitting there for you, Damian Harris doesn't prevent you from going and getting a guy, and you can hold on to him through camp and see how things play out, see if injuries play out. Maybe he's a trade candidate for another team that has an injury. He's still an asset, similar to the idea with Gabe Davis, that maybe becomes a little more flexible for you. But before
we've seen it at we've seen it at the tight end position. Hollister, OJ Howard being signed and then ultimately not making the squad.
Sorry.
And the Bills have, they've been out to dinner with Bijan and Roshan in Texas, and they've been showing interest more recently in Tyjae Spears. So they're sniffing around this running back class for sure.
I think given Hines' restructure, he might honestly be the odd man to be demoted to kind of a return only role, and then you have three running backs where it would be a Cook, a Damian Harris, and then whoever they would draft. I mean, if Hines was making a similar contract to what he was last year, I think his role would be bigger. But it seems to me that it almost looks like the type of money you're paying a guy to do one thing. And if that's the case, I mean, Hines has proven he's a great returner. I want him to be that guy. I would like to see an expanded role for him this year. I'm not saying this is a definite, but I also really like the idea of having a Damian Harris to complement Cook, and then potentially, Jesus, I can't talk, I'm sorry. Potentially, if you draft a really good running back that you could roster, you're doing that same thing you did last season where it's running back by committee, but one of your four running backs, where last year it was Jones being your gunner, this year it's Hines being your returner.
Chris, that's kind of one thing I was thinking of was whenever you mentioned that Sherfield is kind of that special teams guy that takes away Tywan Jones' spot. But then I immediately thought of they're taking these running backs out to dinner and getting a little more a better look at them. So is Damian Harris just kind of like who did they sign? Whoever they signed instead of McKissick when that didn't work out, and then they end up getting Cook. Is Harris just kind of that? Okay, this is my
Duke Johnson.
Yeah, sorry, thank you, Duke Johnson. So, is this with Damian Harris is kind of the Duke Johnson deal? Like, okay, let's pick him up if someone in that it's an insurance if we don't find what we have in the draft. So, if they do draft someone, is someone in the running back room on the way out, or say they draft and DHop comes on, and it's just like this little pieces of playing of roster gymnastics again with special teams players and depth. It's kind of just like all over the place.
Yeah, I know. Tilt's really into the pre-draft stuff.
No, I'm going with.
Tilt, did you want to weigh in at
look,
all about the running backs?
I mean, I was on 95.1 on Tuesday talking about this exact topic with Bijan, and I'll try to put some comfort maybe into this conversation. One, I just don't think he's going to be there at pick 27. I think he's probably one of the best 3 to 5 players overall in this draft. Now, with running backs, that becomes very interesting because we know that value is a little bit more suppressed in the draft, and just because you're maybe one of the best 3 or 5 players in the draft, if you're at the running back position, there's a chance you fall into the 20s or late first round. I would say it's just giving the Bills flexibility when it comes to the draft. We have not seen Brandon Beane in his time since being the GM of the Bills invest a ton of draft capital or dollars into the running back position. And that's not to say that history is always going to repeat itself, but the most they've invested in the running back position really was James Cook as far as draft capital, and that was a late second round pick. So and there were a lot of talks over the past 1 to 2 drafts that the Bills really needed a stud running back. If you go back to 2 drafts ago, it was like Najee Harris or Travis Etienne or Javonte Williams. That didn't happen. Last year, right? You talk about a guy like Breece Hall. That didn't happen. So I'll believe it when I see it, as far as if Brandon Beane's willing to make that investment in the first round running back. But given the history, and we hadn't put more than prior to last year a third round pick into the position, now putting a second round pick this past season, I just feel like it's unlikely that the Bills go that route, even if there is a running back sitting there in the first round that they like. But I would just find it to be unlikely.
Till I am trying to look it up, but I know it's hard to connect the GM to who he was under, right? Like, but in the time in Carolina when Beane was an assistant, we did see them make quite an investment in running back. I want to say it was back-to-back first rounders in Jonathan Stewart and D'Angelo Williams, or like one was a second rounder and one was a first rounder, and that. I'm not saying they can do that in modern NFL necessarily, but I wonder how much that was just Gettleman being a Gettleman type of move, and like he accidentally did something that was good, or if like people beyond underneath him had say and influence in moves like that and those types of investments, because quite an investment in the running back room, and it really did pay off. That was a really great running back room at the time.
Yeah, I mean, you're going back to like 15 years ago, right?
Just a long time ago.
Like,
yeah, 2008.
yeah. So I mean, yeah. I mean, again, history doesn't always repeat
But
itself.
he's always sniffing around. He's always sniffing around in this top section of the running back room. He just hasn't done one yet. But he's always there. He's always in the room.
Well, where do you think Tyjae Spears is getting drafted, Till? Because that's part of the conversation too now.
I mean, probably day 2 would be my guess. I think he's probably, for me, he's like running back 3 or 4 in this draft. And we saw last year, I mean, every year is different, but I think like once that first running back gets picked, it does set a little bit of a domino effect, but I think it just comes down to when that first one is picked. With that said, I do expect Bijan to go in the first round, and I would expect Spears to be a day 2 pick.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the most interesting thing is the fact that they're kind of just hanging out in that market, because it's one thing to have guys at a pro day. I don't necessarily think that a lot of people take that as, oh, they're really interested in these prospects because they're there. Sometimes that is just, we're talking about in the Cover One chat the other day, that sometimes they're just at a pro day because they happen to have a personnel person in that area for another pro day, and it's just a circuit. They happen to be there that weekend. It's a short enough drive where they can rent a car and get there and just confirm some numbers, talk a little bit more, get some guys on tape. Some scouting is also not always about guys that you're going to pick, but guys that are going to be in the system that you're going to hand off that information to your pro scouting department, right? Like you're getting an early heads up on guys that are going to be picked by division rivals that you're going to have to play against this year. So you're getting a little bit of that information sort of all around on guys. But when you take them out to dinner and you spend a whole day doing a private workout, that type of investment in either players or in what we're seeing in the position group, to me, that is a flag that, okay, we have to pay attention to this, because if you're given that kind of investment, then you're in on that position, right?
Yeah, like you're talking about here, I just threw up the tweet from Ryan Fowler from yesterday, talking about how the Bills and Tulane running back Tyjae Spears met, had lunch, went through a private workout with running back coach Kelly Skipper. It certainly signals more than just passing interest. But who knows, man? They got to do their diligence on a lot of these guys that maybe they don't have a ton of intention when it comes to drafting at that position. Maybe they do. We'll see.
Can I ask
for sure.
guys,
All right, go for it.
I just want to ask you guys what you think about the D line. With they have two holes right now without Lawson, without Phillips, and the talk and the trade, the talk of Ed Oliver possibility, and then the random tweet from Boogie Basham. People are saying, "Oh, he's gone," which I disagree. This is that third year for Basham, so I don't agree that he's on his way out. That's that.
If he's gone, it would probably be as part of the deal for DHop. That was sort of the speculation, was that, and that would make sense for Arizona to want someone like Basham more than Oliver, because, I mean, Basham doesn't have the cap hit Oliver does. He's got, he's got more years.
Control. Yeah. No,
couple years left. Yeah.
But, so is all those things, aside from those, like, what do you see them doing? Like, them kind of just waiting out through the draft, pick up a guy or two, and then maybe grab a few vets after the draft, maybe some cap casualties or something afterwards. There are some holes, I think, out of linebacker. We have one major hole there if Bernard's not the guy or whatever. I see D-line as having the most need out of anything. So just your thoughts on when and where you think they'll add some players.
I think they are in a little bit of a position away. I do agree that there's some need there, but I think this is an okay defensive line if you roll it out as is this year. They're going to add no matter what. They like the rotation. They want to have a certain amount of guys out there, so they will add depth somewhere. Even if it's just that. But I think if this is your top end until you're waiting out Von Miller, it's not ideal. but you can work with this. I think AJ Epinesa is better than people are feeling about him because you just look up the stats and you see terrible tackle. He had a rough year finishing plays. Some of that is overblown. Like, you definitely want guys that are tackling, but sometimes it's okay to also be a disruptor. It's okay to be a guy that slows down a running back and then a tackle comes. Not all missed tackles are the same. There's open field missed tackles that lead to touchdowns, but then there's missed tackles in the backfield that slow a guy down and then another player tackles them. That's a win for me. And I think in the coaching staff, they're like, yeah, dude, make that tackle, but great job, great hustle.
He was a
I think
sneaky good pass rusher last year.
Yes.
I mean, if he had more sacks
Seven.
last year than anyone for the Bills had in 2021.
And he's got more moves than anyone else besides Vaughn that can line up next to Greg Rousseau or on the opposite side of Greg Rousseau. So I think you can get by with him in passing situations.
He's also he's really quick off the ball, and that's only gotten better since he's been working with Vaughn.
Yeah, so I'm a higher on Epinesa than the vibe feels on him right now in terms of a rotational dude. I would like a little bit more. I'd love to get your hands on a Justin Houston. I think you could wait on something like that. I'd bring him into camp and see if maybe that's just enough to really push AJ to that next level so he takes that leap and solidifies that spot.
Still a bunch of vet pass rushers out there. Like you said, you can wait.
After that mid-second deadline for the comp pick thing so that it doesn't impact anything for you there. But I'm okay with this defensive line. I don't think there's some holes. You'd like to get better at spots, but I also like the draft, especially on the interior defensive line. There's a handful of guys that I would bring in and feel real confident in getting them right away into the rotation.
Yeah, ultimately, I think we're going to need to add a safety, a depth safety in the draft who can develop into a starter. I think that's another need. But
safety, you know what though, I do feel really encouraged currently about DeMar Hamlin situation. It does feel like there's a lot of positive news coming out, and that there's a pretty good intent to.
Even with Hamlin, you need a fourth guy, though, right? I mean, we were talking about when
Christian Benford.
Yeah, maybe.
Asterisk, maybe.
When they do it, I'll count for it.
Sure. But anyways, I would love to continue on this conversation, but dude, I don't know what's going on there, Wes Moore. I'm sorry, but we are bouncing. I gotta go pick up my kid. Appreciate everybody that came on, listened, contributed to the conversation. You guys are awesome. This makes Friday morning way cooler, especially on a gloomy, kind of cold Friday afternoon here. So appreciate everybody. Chris, you're the man. Thanks for your time, dude.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Obviously, we do this every week. And we'll see you guys, on Playback tonight for the Sabres, playback.tv/cover1, and Greg's show. Aaron will be there on Cover One YouTube at 9. So you got the Sabres at 7. You got the Greg Thompson Sports Show at 9. We got you covered tonight, guys. Please head over to Cover One Playback right now. Join our room if you haven't already. That's playback.tv/cover1. If you're listening to this live here on Friday night, Anthony Prohaska, Adam Pencil, and I will be hanging out over there from 7 p.m. until the end of the Sabres and Devils game. The Sabres are in the black and red goat head jerseys tonight, and they're 8-1-2 in that kit, so it could be a good one. Playback is a new platform for us, but it's free, just like YouTube. You create a login and join our room. That's just their terminology for subscribing to our channel. And like Twitter Spaces, we have the ability over there to bring you up as a speaker so you can join in the audio conversation in addition to the chat. Anyway, sorry for the lengthy plug, but we're really trying to build this new Cover One Playback platform. We have plans to use it in different ways, so we hope you'll join us over there now and be a part of that. Again, it's playback.tv/cover1. Head over there right now, join our room. If it's still Friday night as you're listening to this, you can hang out with us for a bit and talk Bills, Sabres, Mighty Ducks, whatever's on your mind. One more time, playback.tv/cover1. Cover One Playback. Win or lose, you know it'll be a good time.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe this afternoon if DHop signs, I'm coming back. I'll be here.
Yep, ditto.
All right, see you guys. Go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thanks, guys. Go Bills.